The year was 2187. New Avalon, once a city of shining towers and clean streets, was now a graveyard of glass and steel. Broken buildings leaned against each other like old men about to fall. Dust and smoke covered the sky, blocking out the sun. The air smelled of rust and burned metal. In the shadow of a collapsed bridge, Captain Elias Hart moved slowly, his boots silent on the cracked ground. At 80 years old, his body was stiff and his back ached, but his mind was sharp as ever. His face, lined with deep wrinkles, showed the hard life he had lived. His blue eyes stayed alert, scanning every corner for signs of the enemy. The Dravicans patrolled the streets above. They were tall, thick-skinned creatures with glowing red eyes. Their armor hissed with steam as they moved. Their weapons were big and deadly, ready to kill anything that dared to fight back. Elias knew the aliens would not show mercy. He slipped into a hidden entrance, a metal door half buried under rubble. It led to the old subway tunnels, where the last free humans lived like ghosts. The tunnels were damp and cold. Water dripped from broken pipes. Rats scurried in the dark. At the end of a long passage, Elias reached a steel door. He knocked 3 times, paused, then knocked twice more. The door creaked open, and a wrinkled face peered out. It was Mara, once a brilliant engineer, now their chief mechanic. "You're late," she said with a small smile. "Had to dodge a patrol," Elias replied. He stepped inside. The main room was filled with about 20 people, most over 70. Their clothes were patched and worn. Their faces were tired, but when Elias entered, they sat up straighter. He was their leader, their hope. Elias stood in front of them. He took a deep breath. "The Dravicans are planning a full sweep tomorrow. They're bringing in more soldiers. They mean to wipe us out, once and for all." A heavy silence filled the room. Some of the older men clenched their jaws. Some of the women looked at the floor, their hands trembling slightly. "We have 2 choices," Elias said. "Hide and wait for death, or fight." "Fight?" asked George, a former school teacher. His voice was rough from years spent breathing the dirty air. "With what?" "Sticks and stones." Elias smiled. A slow, knowing smile. He bent down and unrolled a battered map of the city on the table. "We fight with our minds," he said. "We know this city better than they do. We know where the tunnels run, where the old power grids are, where the forgotten traps lie." He pointed to parts of the map. Old sewer lines, broken electric stations, abandoned drone hubs. "We can turn the city against them, set traps, cut their communications. Use the tunnels to strike and vanish." Mara stepped forward. "We could rig the old energy plants to explode. Take out a few squads at once." James, once a police chief, nodded. "We could use the broken subway cars. Block their paths, trap them." Excitement began to spread. Fear was still there, but now it mixed with something stronger. Hope. Elias looked around the room, his heart swelling with pride. These were not weak old men and women. These were survivors, fighters. "They think we're too old, too broken," Elias said. "Let's prove them wrong." There was a murmur of agreement, then louder, then cheering. Elias raised his hand. "Get some rest tonight. Tomorrow we take back our city." As he spoke, the ground rumbled slightly. Above them the Dravican ships passed overhead, their engines growling like beasts in the dark. But deep below, in the cold tunnels of New Avalon, the first seeds of rebellion had been planted. Morning came slowly in New Avalon. There was no sunrise, only a pale light that crept through the cracks in the ruined city. In the tunnels below, Elias Hart was already awake, sitting at a battered metal table, studying the city map. Today was the day they would begin. One by one, the others gathered in the meeting room. Some leaned on canes, others limped in with stiff legs, but every face showed the same thing: determination. Mara arrived first, her tool belt clinking with every step. Her gray hair was tied back, and she wore thick gloves stained with oil. She sat beside Elias, nodding to him with a small, confident smile. James followed, his old police badge still pinned proudly to his chest. His once strong frame had shrunk with age, but his mind was still sharp. He carried a notebook filled with plans and guard schedules he had memorized over the years. Behind them came George, the schoolteacher, and Helen, a former doctor, carrying a bundle of medical supplies wrapped in cloth. They were joined by Thomas, a retired subway operator, who knew every tunnel like the back of his hand. When everyone had arrived, Elias stood up slowly. "We need every mind, every hand," he said. "Today we become the old guard." The group listened closely as Elias spoke. "We'll divide into teams," he said. "Each team will have a task, setting traps, gathering supplies, sabotaging the aliens." He pointed to Mara. "Mara will lead the engineering team. She knows how to rig explosives, power old machines, and build traps." Then to James. "James will organize security. Patrols, alarms. He knows how to set up a perimeter." Elias turned to Helen. "Helen will handle medical. We'll need her when the fighting starts." He looked at Thomas last. "Thomas will guide us through the tunnels. He knows the safe paths and the dangerous ones." There were no complaints. Each person nodded, understanding the heavy responsibility placed on them. Elias moved to the map and pointed at a spot near the surface. "This is our first target," he said. "An old drone control center. If we can get it working, we can turn their own surveillance against them." "How far is it?" George asked. 2 miles through enemy territory," Elias answered. "Mostly through tunnels, but we'll have to cross 2 open streets." The room grew tense. Open streets meant exposure. Exposure meant death. "We'll go at night," Elias said. "We move quietly. No lights, no noise." He handed out old battered weapons, rusted pistols, knives made from scrap metal, even a few handmade slingshots. "These will have to do until we can find better," he said. They all took their weapons without complaint. Elias looked at each of them. He saw the pain in their joints, the slowness in their steps, but he also saw courage stronger than steel. "They think we're too old to matter," he said. "They think wrong." A murmur of agreement filled the room. For the next few hours they prepared. Mara checked batteries and built small bombs from spare parts. James trained volunteers to listen for alien patrols and raise alarms. Helen set up a makeshift medical station in one of the safer tunnels. Thomas spread out maps and taught the others how to navigate without getting lost. Every move was careful. Every word was important. They could not afford mistakes. By sunset the old guard was ready. Elias called them together, one last time before they left. "Remember," he said, "we're not fighting to win medals. We're fighting for every human left alive." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "We fight smart. We fight together, and we never ever give up." The group nodded, a silent promise between them. They packed their gear and waited at the tunnel mouth, staring into the dark city beyond. The night was cold and full of danger, but they were ready. The old guard was marching to war. The city above was silent, but Elias knew it was a dangerous silence. Alien patrols moved like shadows between broken buildings. Their red eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, scanning for any sign of life. From the tunnel mouth, Elias gave the signal. A small wave of his hand. The old guard moved out, their steps careful and quiet. Each carried a small pack strapped to their back. Tools, weapons, food. Nothing too heavy. They couldn't afford to be slowed down. Thomas led the way. He knew every crack, every hidden path. He took them through a forgotten maintenance tunnel under the old city park. Vines and twisted metal hung from the ceiling. In the darkness, rats scattered at their approach. At the first street crossing, they stopped. The street was wide and exposed. Pieces of broken cars lay rusting in the open. A toppled streetlight sparked weakly, casting flickering light across the ground. Elias raised his hand again, signaling for a halt. He peered around the edge of a fallen wall. A Dravacon patrol was moving nearby. 3 soldiers, armor gleaming under the broken moonlight. Elias turned to the group and whispered, "We wait." The old guard crouched low, barely breathing. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, the patrol moved on, disappearing into the ruins. Elias gave the signal to move. One by one, the group sprinted across the street, sticking to the shadows. Their old bodies weren't as fast as they used to be, but they moved with care and discipline. No one fell, no one made a sound. On the other side, they gathered in a broken storefront to catch their breath. Mara checked the map by the weak light of a cracked tablet screen. "Drone Center is 4 blocks north," she whispered. Elias nodded. "Let's go." The rest of the trip was slow but steady. They climbed over rubble, squeezed through fallen beams and ducked past alien sentries. Twice they had to hide under debris, as patrols passed dangerously close. Finally, they reached their target. The old drone control center was half buried under a collapsed office building. Twisted steel beams jutted out like broken bones. The front entrance was blocked, but Thomas found a back way in. An old maintenance door rusted halfway off its hinges. Inside, the air was thick with dust. Mara and her team quickly got to work. She moved like a woman half her age, hands flying over broken consoles, rewiring panels and fixing shattered screens. James and Elias stood guard at the doorway, watching the dark streets. After an hour, Mara gave a sharp nod. "I can get the drones working," she said. "But not all of them. Most are too damaged." "How many?" Elias asked. "Maybe 5 or 6 surveillance drones," she said. "Enough to confuse them. Enough to buy us time." It was better than nothing. Mara tapped a few keys. Screens flickered to life, showing grainy black and white images of the city from the drone's cameras. Elias smiled. "For once we get to be the ones watching them." He turned to the group. "We'll use the drones to feed false reports. Lead patrols into traps. Scatter their forces." The old guard worked through the night, setting up the first traps. George rigged an abandoned car with explosives made from old batteries and chemicals. Helen prepared first aid kits for the wounded. Thomas mapped out escape routes in case things went wrong. When dawn began to break, a weak gray light through the smoke-filled sky, their first trap was ready. A small alien scouting group approached an old parking garage. From the drone feed, Elias watched them walk right into the trap. George pressed the detonator. A sharp blast echoed through the empty streets. The parking garage collapsed, burying the aliens under tons of rubble. The old guard didn't cheer. They simply moved back into the tunnels, silent and determined. It was a small victory, but it was a beginning. Above ground, the Dravokans were starting to notice something was wrong. The old guard smiled grimly. The fight for New Avalon had truly begun. For the next few days, the old guard kept striking. They used their few drones to spread false alarms, drawing Dravokon patrols into ambushes. Old subway tunnels became deadly traps. Abandoned cars became bombs. Broken buildings became hiding places. The Dravokons grew angrier. They sent more soldiers into the ruins, searching for the human fighters. But they still didn't know who was behind the attacks. They thought it must be young warriors, hidden somewhere. They had no idea it was a group of old men and women, fighting with everything they had left. One night, Elias called a meeting in the underground shelter. "We need to hit something bigger," he said, his voice low but firm. "They're bringing in reinforcements. We have to slow them down before they find us." He pointed at a spot on the map. "The main communication hub. If we can destroy it, they'll be blind and deaf in this part of the city." The room grew quiet. Everyone knew the hub. It was heavily guarded, full of alien soldiers and machines. Attacking it would be dangerous. Maybe impossible. Mara leaned forward. "We'd have to get past 2 security fences, and the power grid." James added, "If we're caught, we won't make it back." Elias nodded. "I know the risks, but if we don't try, they'll find us anyway." He looked around the room. "We've survived this long because we were smart. We'll be smart again. We'll strike fast, hit hard and disappear. One by one, the heads around the table nodded. The old guard was ready. They moved out just before midnight. The city was colder now. A sharp wind blew through the broken streets. The smell of rain mixed with smoke in the air. Thomas led them through hidden alleys and broken buildings. Avoiding patrols, they reached the first fence, a high metal barrier topped with spikes. Mara and George worked quickly, cutting a small hole just big enough for the group to slip through. At the second fence, things went wrong. As Mara worked on the wires, a security drone buzzed overhead, its red light sweeping the ground. Elias saw it first. "Hide," he hissed. The group scattered into the shadows, pressing against walls and rubble. The drone hovered, its sensors blinking. For a moment Elias thought they were caught. But then the drone moved on, its light fading into the night. Mara finished cutting the fence. They slipped through and moved toward the hub. The building loomed ahead, a squat fortress of concrete and steel. Bright lights shone from its towers. Dravakan guards stood at every door. Elias pointed to a side entrance, an old service door half hidden by debris. "That's our way in," he whispered. Mara rigged a small explosive. It made no noise, just a soft pop as the lock gave way. Inside, the halls were empty. Most of the guards stayed outside, watching for big threats, not small ones sneaking through the cracks. Elias and Mara found the main control room. Banks of computers and screens filled the space. Elian symbols flashed across them. Mara pulled a small device from her pack, a hacking tool she had built from old parts. "This will fry their systems," she said. She plugged it into a console. Lights flickered. Sirens began to wail. "Time to go," Elias shouted. The old guard raced back the way they came. Behind them, explosions rocked the hub as systems overloaded. Sparks flew from broken machines. Guards shouted in anger and confusion. The old guard ran through the night, hearts pounding, lungs burning. They didn't stop until they were deep inside their tunnels again. Safe for now. But not everyone had made it back. At the head count, 2 were missing: George and Ruth, an old nurse who had stayed to cover their retreat. Elias bowed his head. "They gave us a chance to finish what we started," he said. "We won't waste it." The old guard stood in silence, mourning their friends. Outside, the Dravakans raged, but they were blind and deaf in half the city now. The humans had struck a real blow. But Elias knew the price would only grow heavier from here. The tunnels were quieter now. The loss of George and Ruth weighed heavily on everyone. Their beds were empty, their laughter missing from the air. No one spoke of it, but the pain was in every glance, every heavy step. Elias sat alone, staring at the old city map spread across the table. His hand hovered over the worn paper, tracing streets he once knew like the lines on his own palm. He felt tired, more tired than he had ever been. James approached quietly and sat down across from him. "You blame yourself," James said. Elias didn't answer right away. Finally, he nodded. "I led them into danger. I should have found a better way." James shook his head. "They knew the risks. We all do. They chose to fight. For us. For all of us." Elias looked at the map again, his heart heavy. "Then we need to make it mean something." Outside the shelter, the group gathered. Mara had collected old generators and parts from abandoned stores. Thomas had found more hidden tunnels that led to important enemy targets. Helen had trained a few more survivors in first aid, preparing for worse days to come. They were wounded, but they were not broken. Elias stood before them. "We've hurt them," he said. "But we haven't stopped them. Not yet." He pointed to a spot near the center of the city, the old energy core of New Avalon. "This is where we hit next." The Dravokans use the city's old power to run their ships and weapons. If we take it out, we cripple them. A low murmur spread through the group. The energy core was dangerous. It was unstable, even before the invasion. Mara stepped forward. "We can do it," she said firmly. "We overload the core, set off a chain reaction. It'll create an EMP blast big enough to fry their systems. Helen added. It could shut down their tech for miles. Thomas nodded. And it'll take them a long time to rebuild. There was silence. Everyone understood the risk. The blast could kill them too if they weren't fast enough. Elias looked into each face, lined with age, but filled with fierce determination. We do this smart, he said. We split into 3 teams, one to plant the charges, one to guard the exits, one to create distractions. He pointed at Mara. You'll handle the charges. You know the core's systems. To James. You'll lead the defense teams. No one gets close to the core while we're working. And to Thomas. You'll guide the retreat. We'll have only minutes once the charges are set. The plan was dangerous. Maybe foolish, but it was their best shot. They spent 2 days preparing. Mara built bombs from stolen parts and old batteries. James trained fighters to hold choke points and set up traps. Thomas memorized every escape route. They had no drones left. No heavy weapons. Only their minds, their hands, and their will to survive. On the last night before the mission, Elias gathered the group. He spoke simply, from the heart. We're not just fighting for ourselves, he said. We're fighting for the ones we lost, for the ones still hiding, for the chance that maybe, someday New Avalon will be free again. There were no speeches, no grand promises, just a quiet, shared understanding. They knew what they had to do. They would fight. They would risk everything. Not because they were strong, but because they were determined. Because they refused to give up. The old guard was ready for their greatest battle. Night fell over New Avalon, like a heavy curtain. The old guard moved through the ruins, silent and focused. Each carried only what they needed, small explosives, tools, and weapons. Their old bones ached, but their spirits were strong. This was their final mission. Elias led the way, his sharp eyes watching every shadow. Thomas guided them through broken alleys and forgotten tunnels. James and his team moved to set traps at key intersections. Mara carried the precious bombs carefully, strapped tightly to her back. Above them, the city was alive with enemy patrols. The Dravokans knew something was happening. They just didn't know where. The group reached the energy core. It stood like a giant metal heart in the center of the ruined city. Thick cables snaked out from it in every direction, pulsing with stolen power. Guards circled it, their weapons glowing. Elias gave the signal. The team split up. James and his fighters moved first, sneaking into position. They set tripwires, planted homemade bombs, and prepared ambushes. Thomas and a few others scouted the escape routes, clearing rubble and marking safe paths. Mara and Elias moved toward the base of the core. They found a maintenance hatch, half buried under debris. Mara pried it open with a crowbar, her hands steady. Inside, the air was thick with heat, and the hum of energy. Cables lined the walls, sparking and buzzing. The core glowed faintly, a deep blue light pulsing from its center. Mara worked quickly. She attached bombs to key control panels and power lines. Her fingers moved fast, despite the stiffness in her joints. Elias kept watch, his pistol ready. Above ground, James triggered the first trap. A loud explosion shook the earth. Elian soldiers shouted in confusion. Another blast followed. Then another. The Dravokans rushed to respond, leaving their posts around the core unguarded. Mara finished setting the last bomb. She looked at Elias and nodded. Ready. Elias pressed the detonator into her hand. You set it off when I give the signal, he said. Not before. Mara hesitated. We won't all make it back, she said quietly. Elias smiled sadly. We'll make sure enough of us do. They climbed back out into the night. The city was chaos. Elian patrols raced through the streets, blinded by the smoke and noise. James and his team fought hard, holding the enemy back, buying time. Elias found Thomas near the exit tunnel. All clear? Elias asked. Thomas nodded. For now. Elias raised his radio. Mara now. A second later, the ground shook violently. A wave of blue light burst from the energy core, spreading out in every direction. Alien ships above the city flickered and fell from the sky. Weapons short-circuited. Vehicles died where they stood. The EMP blast had worked. The Dravokans were blind, deaf, and helpless. But the force of the blast had triggered fires and more explosions. Buildings collapsed. The air filled with dust and heat. "Move!" Elias shouted. The old guard ran through the ruins, coughing, stumbling over debris. Every step was a battle. James was hit by falling rubble but pushed forward, leaning on two others for support. Helen carried a wounded fighter on her back, refusing to leave anyone behind. Elias stayed at the rear, making sure everyone got out. Finally, after what felt like forever, they reached the tunnels, safe, alive, but not all. Several had fallen during the escape, brave friends who had given everything for this one chance. Elias leaned against the cold tunnel wall, breathing hard. They had done it. They had struck a blow the Dravokans would never forget. They had shown that even the old and tired could still fight, still win. But the cost was high, too high. Elias closed his eyes, honoring the fallen. Then he stood up straight. There was still work to do. The old guard would rebuild. They would finish what they had started. The tunnels were quiet. The old guard sat together, resting, breathing, healing. Their bodies ached. Their faces were lined with dirt and exhaustion, but in their eyes burned a light that had not been there before. Hope, above ground. New Avalon had changed. The energy core was destroyed. The Dravokans' machines were dead. Their patrols were scattered, confused and weakened. For the first time in many years, the city belonged more to the humans than to the invaders. Elias stood at the mouth of the tunnel, looking out across the broken streets. Smoke rose into the morning sky, but beyond it, he could see the first hints of sunrise. A soft golden light touched the tops of ruined towers. It was a new beginning. Behind him, Mara approached, her steps slow but steady. "We did it," she said simply. Elias nodded. James joined them, one arm in a sling, his face bruised but smiling. "They'll try to come back stronger," James said. "They always do." Elias turned and looked at the others, the tired, battered, brave faces of the old guard. "Then we'll be ready," he said. They would rebuild. They would teach others how to fight, how to survive, how to win with wisdom, patience, and heart. New Avalon would rise again, not because of strength, but because of courage. Because a small group of forgotten warriors had refused to give up. Later that day, they gathered in what was left of the old city square. They planted a torn human flag into the cracked stone, marking the ground they had reclaimed. No speeches, no grand celebrations, just a quiet, powerful promise to each other. They had survived. They had fought back. They had won, and they would keep fighting, no matter how long it took. Elias looked up at the rising sun, feeling its warmth on his face. For the first time in many years, he allowed himself a small, true smile.